My name is Mitchell Gumko, and my topic is Operation Torch, and this is for George Maniatis' World War II history class. Here's the table of context, what we'll talk about today, or what I will talk about to you guys today. We start off with Vichy France, we talk about the Allies, we talk about the Axis, reasons for the operation, potential problems with Operation Torch, we talk about Operation Torch, obviously, because it's the topic. Strategy of Operation Torch. We'll touch on the generals that were involved in Operation Torch, but those generals also were involved throughout the rest of the war. They were very important through this operation and very important throughout World War II. They didn't just stop after Operation Torch or just call it quits, and they kept on going. They kept doing their duty for their country and throughout the war. We'll talk about the accomplishments from Operation Torch, the importance of Operation Torch, what Operation Torch failed to do, the aftermath, and the casualties of Operation Torch. Vichy France. So Vichy France became known as Vichy France after the Nazis obviously beat the French, and they came in. They kind of set up this puppet type government, and they put this guy who was actually a French general and a French marshal, Philip Pétain, and I think you can see my mouse, but if you can't, if you can, there he is. If you can't, but he's the guy on the left of that photo, and standing across from Hitler. So they put Philip Pétain in as their leader, more like the Nazis put him in, and kind of made this puppet government set up in France. It made it be like France is free, but France really wasn't free. France also did. Well, I know this map only shows France, but France also, if you know, they had territory and like colonies in northern Africa. So they have a Vichy France or Vichy French people down there, and Vichy France is down there too. They have like their troops sent or down. They have troops down there as well and other things. And under this rule, it was honestly very bad. It was dictator type. Pétain established an authoritarian government that reserved like many liberal policies and began super tight supervision on the economy, became very conservative, very anti-Semitic and anti-Bolshevik, and it just became very bad. It was not a good place to be in. French police were ordered to round up Jews and other undesirables, such as communists and political refugees. At least 72,000 people were killed as a result of that. It was a dictator government. If you didn't follow their policy, well, you're going to be gone. So France, wasn't technically under Nazi rule, but it was under Nazi rule. Just they want to give you fake freedom or something. That's why they were independent, but they weren't really independent. They were just the Nazis' little brother, Germany's little brother. So we get into the Allies' power, and so far throughout the war, not much has been going for them. The U.S. hasn't truly entered the war. They entered the war a few years ago, but they haven't made any plans in Europe. Really, they haven't gone to Europe throughout this point because Operation Torch starts in 1942. So Russia is about to get invaded, and they're getting invaded by the Nazis. Britain's been holding on the fort of Europe. They've been playing defense. They haven't really had their chance to breathe either. They had to help try to fight and win France. They end up losing France. They got to defend Britain when the Nazis invade Britain. And the Nazis have been using their blitzkrieg tactics to really just destroy every country that they get to. And the Allies have been kind of in the deep down and struggling. They haven't been able to get up and get on their feet a little bit. They're fighting and surviving. Don't get me wrong. They're not out of the war, but the path they were going on, they need to make some plans and they need to make some changes because you can't always win by playing defense. You got to find a way to get on offense and make some scores. And then obviously the Soviets have to deal with the Nazis, like I said, and right away from the beginning, the Nazis were kind of destroying the Soviets. Poor planning later causes them not to, but from the beginning of when the Nazis decided to invade and start on a second front war in Europe, they kind of just start destroying the Soviets. So things are looking bad, and they're kind of the Soviets and the British were kind of trying to get the U.S. into the war earlier, and like I said, they had just entered the war a year ago, so like they haven't done much. They haven't really gotten to Europe yet, and they really need their help. As on the other side of things, the Axis powers, the bad guys, um, they have been rolling. Things have been going high for them. Japan just kind of entered the war too after they signed the peace treaty, and then the U.S. declared war on them. So, but the Nazis, I mean, they were unstoppable. They were the best team, if you would say it's a team. But I mean, they were an unstoppable force at this time. Yes, they didn't win the Battle of Britain, but I mean, they still put up a good fight, and they still kind of dominated that battle. They really put British people to the test. They really put Britain to the test, and they destroyed and rolled through France, and they were growing and they were getting scary. They had Italy now, and a bunch of good attacking strategies and fast attacking strategies. That was the key, and that's why they got into France so fast and destroyed France, was because they used their blitzkrieg. And then when they took France instead of Vichy France, they had parts in northern Africa, so then they can kind of control the Mediterranean. The Nazis helped Spain, but we'll get into that later. And then you have Italy, who has some territory down in Africa, I believe, or they go down there and fight some territory down there. And I mean, they are just on the offense, and they are rolling. They are not stopping. No one's able to stop them. No one's getting in their way, and it's just things were looking good for them. So this is why we have to get something going. We've been on the defensive too long. The Nazis have been, making the war however they want it to be. They're making all the moves. So this is when we get into Operation Torch. The reason for it, well, like I said, so the Soviets want the Allies to open up another front. Get the Germans out of here. We're getting smacked by the Germans. They're coming in. They're moving through Russia quick. They're going to get Moscow and Leningrad and Stalingrad. Like, they're getting close to key areas and key places that the Soviets have a lot of resources and troops in. So the Soviets really need the Allies to kind of get the Germans off of them. The British and Americans just didn't know where they should go. Like, where do we go to open it up? The Americans wanted to, and we'll talk about this more too, one general specifically, but the Americans wanted to go straight, some Americans wanted to go straight into Europe. They didn't want to go down into Africa. They just wanted to get straight to where the action was and get into Europe and start attacking the Nazis. But the British just said, no, let's get into Europe. Let's kind of get down there, set up some bases, maneuver away and have like a launch pad almost. So that's what they do. They have to find a way to Europe. So they find this way of going into northern Africa. The primary objective was to secure bridgeheads for opening a second front to the rear of Germany and Italy. You come in below both those guys, and you got the whole Mediterranean to you. You can go any place and kind of start attacking wherever you want. You push all their troops out of northern Africa, and you take that place. You take that land and you can use it to your advantage, and that's what they were trying to do, because it was time for them to start making the moves and not just follow whatever the Nazis were doing. So potential problems with this. So as I said, Spain. So this guy on the left is Francisco Franco. Excuse me. He's a Spain dictator. He ended up winning the civil war in Spain, but he was aided by the Nazis. The Nazis helped Francisco Franco win the Civil War, take over Spain, and you would kind of expect that he's going to help the Nazis in this situation. So these troops, the American and the British, are kind of like, well, we're going to Africa. You see in this map, they're pretty close. It's not that far away. Spain and the northern part of Morocco and the southern part of Spain, they're pretty close. I mean, obviously there's more room than what shows, but I mean, to send a navy down there, it's not that hard. To send a few airplanes or some soldiers, it's not hard. So They were worried about that. And Vichy French, like I said, Vichy France had Vichy French soldiers down there. They had troops down there. Vichy French had controlled the northern part of Africa. They had territory in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, or Tunisia. I can't really say these countries. I'm very bad, but so when the Allies were invading, they were afraid of that. They had to get and prepare for this Vichy French and this Vichy French resistance, since they had all of that down there, and since they were allies with the Nazis. But I mean, they weren't truly allies because they're just a puppet government set up by the Nazis. Like, yes, they were allies and independent, but they weren't really truly independent, especially in France. When you're right next to Germany and stuff, like, you don't really have a choice or a say of words about how you want to do. The Vichy French resistance, we'll get into it in the next slide, but you see what kind of happens. But I mean, you got to deal with Spain, that's right there, and you got to deal with these people that are already on the country. It's kind of hard to go from ocean to land sometimes, and you don't know how many soldiers and troops they have there. You hope they don't have that many, but you never know. So that was their problems. Do we have to deal with the Vichy French and then Spain sending troops over, or is it just going to be Vichy France or French soldiers? So we get into the operation. So Operation Torture is from 1942 on November 8th and November 10th. It wasn't a very long, but it was the North African campaign, the beginning kind of the North African campaign. It was a three-prong attack. The Allies' invasion of North Africa in 1942, so of Operation Torch, was intended to draw the Axis forces out of the Soviet Union's way and out of the Eastern Front, like giving the Soviets a break from everything they have been doing. The operation was comprised between the U.S. and British troops, and the operation was planned as a pincer movement with, like I said, three-prong attack. So they're going to land in three different places, and they have three different task forces. They have the Western Task Force, which was composed of Anglo-American, and then they have the Algerian Mediterranean coast, and that was the Central and Eastern Task Forces. So you have these guys coming in, and they're going to come out, and they're going to take on the Vichy France, and they're hoping that they come in and they take this land, because then it sets up, like I said, everything to get into Europe. The primary objective of the Allies was to secure the bridgehead to get, like I said, to Europe. So, coming in here and get the whole Mediterranean, and once you win these two areas especially, you got a lot of things to do. Now, there's a lot of troops from all over here to here, so they do have a lot of work to do, but so they came in and they had launched all their troops in those three different areas. So, like I said, there was the Central, and the three task forces: the Central, Western, and Eastern. Central, composed from assets of the United Kingdom, and also encouraged or had people from the French Resistance in that group as well. Vichy French warships undertook a story from Oran's port, but were all either sunk or driven ashore after attempt to capture the port. They had failed, and British Navy, which is one of the best navies, really just overpowered the Vichy France, and they had already surrendered on November 9th. So it's a day in. During this time on the Western, so if we go back to this photo, the Western is right here, and we just talked about the center, which is in the middle. So the Western Front affected its landing on November 8th, like everything else, a mainly Navy landing. It had a lot of Navy on it, mainly just Navy bombardment. Had been about it. The French forces would not resist. In fact, the initial stiff French defense caused loose losses among the landing forces. However, by November 10th, all landing objectives have been accomplished, and then the U.S. units were poised to take an assault on Casablanca, whose harbor approaches were the scene of brief but fierce naval engagement. The French surrendered the city before an all-out attack was launched. So they gave in a good fight, but they ended up just giving it up. They did what they could, but I mean, they didn't have that much. Now we can go look at the Eastern. On the Eastern side of things, Um, it was also British aided by anti-Vichy French, so people that resisted the French puppet government, and that took place in the Algiers on November 8th, like every other day, like every other invasion. Thus, the level of the French opposition at the landing beaches was low or non-existent. The only serious fighting in this area was at the port, where U.S. Army Rangers were landed to prevent the French from destroying uh, facilities and other special things like ships and things that they could use for their advantage. Resistance had been overcome by the evening of November 10th when the city was surrendered to the U.S. and the British forces. So, obviously, Operation Torch wasn't a gruesome, crazy battle of any kind or any sort. It wasn't like D-Day. It wasn't like the Battle of Britain, even though it wasn't the Battle of France. It was quick, short, and sweet. But I mean, they didn't know what it was going to be like. They were going in thinking, okay, this could happen. What's going to happen? What are we going to do if this happens? What are we going to do if this happens? So they kind of had to be expecting the worst when they came into here. So now we can talk about their strategy of this war. So like I said, it was a three-pronged attack with three different groups. So all of these groups and all of them also all took place on the same day. It's kind of like how the Japanese, when they did their stunt in the Pacific Theater, they attacked all those places on the same day and they hit Pearl Harbor on the same day. The U.S. and the British troops and soldiers, and the strategy was to punch them in the mouth hard right away. Not, oh, we'll deploy this Eastern Front here, try to control that area, or, we'll put the Western Front in, and then we'll work our way into the Mediterranean. No, it was, boom, we're going to smack you in the face and get everything down. And that was a huge part. Like, the Americans and the British had achieved a huge surprise, and they were just too full, throwing their, people that were there into confusion. What do we do? Oh my gosh, we got people landing here, 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 and then they all come together at one place and they just take it over. So it really just threw into a lot of confusion for the Vichy French soldiers there. And to be honest, most of these people down here that were Vichy French or Vichy French or French people or French soldiers, there was a lot of kind of resistance down here. That's why, like, before they even got here, the U.S. and the British didn't know how much resistance they were going to get, because these people, they weren't really that close to Nazi Germany. Nazi didn't invade them really, or Nazi Germany didn't invade them. They were just under German rule, or French rule, I should say, so they had to turn to Vichy France. But they truly weren't that into, I guess you could say, all Vichy government style. The French who they had enlisted to their cause were caught unready. Like I said, they were literally surprised. They didn't know what to do. At Casablanca that happened, at Oran that happened, at the Algiers that happened. Everywhere these people we attacked, and every strategy that we had, or three-pronged attack like this, and all at once, just was so much for them that they couldn't do anything about it. And hesitation and confusion among the French defenders meant that the invading troops made it to shore quickly, and they made it there easily. The difficulty arose in the extending the beachhead, however, but by the third day, like I said, so by the 10th, the French were done. They had already lost too much. All the troops had already been on the land, and they still had their whole navy up there that they could just launch missiles on land and bring in, even some aircraft. So by the third day, they were done. It was just kind of an overpower, punch you in the face. So we have the generals. Now, like I was saying, some of the U.S. people didn't want to go to Africa. They want to go to Europe. They want to go start the war in Europe. They thought, especially General. So this guy, I should get into this guy. This guy, General George C. Marshall, is the United States Army Chief of Staff. He opposed Operation Torch, and he wanted to invade Europe. He said that would help the Soviets. He opposed it because he viewed it as, in simple terms, the United States should concentrate its military focus on achieving a successful lodgment onto the European continent as soon as possible. And he doesn't think we should go into Africa. No, we need to go into Europe now. And he wanted to go in the summer of 1942. The plight of the Soviet Union seemed desperate. He was saying, the Soviets, like I said, they're getting destroyed by Adolf, and they're just getting crushed. And he was thinking, it's our time. If we go into Europe, they're going to get the Nazis' attention. At least you go into Europe and make some noise. We'll get the Nazis' attention for sure then. Okay, now we have a serious two-front war. We got to fight these guys. That's what Marshall thought. He was thinking, hey, man, yeah, North Africa would be nice. We got a good setup. But right now, do we have the time? Do we have the resources? Are we able to go to North Africa, and delay going to Europe a year, 6 months, whatever it may be, 18 months? Or do we have to go now? And he was thinking, we got to go now because the Soviets, they fall. What are we going to do, So he was thinking in those terms, go to Europe because that's where the majority of the problems are. And the way you solve your problems is going right to the head, right to the start, right to the main part of the problem. We have General Eisenhower. General Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces in the Mediterranean Theater. He was a great dude. He did the invasions for the North Africa, like I said, North African campaign, and obviously the invasions for Operation Torch. He was also the commander of Operation Overlord. Eisenhower also did a lot of things throughout the whole war. It wasn't just he did these things. No, he did other things. He helped in Europe and stuff. But for here, he really was a big planner for this operation. He planned the three-pronged attack. He helped design the strategy and the platform for this, and he was a supporter for going in too. And the British gave him head command here. Even though the British and the Americans are working together, sometimes that can be a little struggle. You got two powerhouses, wanting to be number one, who's going to be alpha, who's not going to be alpha. But the British gave Eisenhower full control on the Mediterranean theater. They said, these are your troops, command them how you want. So we have General George Patton. And he served in the First World War, like other U.S. Generals. And he was leading troops during the Operation of Torch in 1942. And he was leading them in the invasion of Casablanca. And the final plan, which was to capture Casablanca, was to be made an all-American task force. So he actually controlled. So in the west, so we go back here. He's in the western front, and he controlled this part of the operation. So he had that middle line going to Casablanca, and it was an all-American attack composed of 35,000 men, and the attack was highly successful with French resistance and Allied casualties at a minimum, although it was a little bit damaged from the battle. North Africa, this part of North Africa proved to be a crucial part of the land, and this battle wasn't too tough, I should say, but it made him work still. He ended up getting the win and doing a good job. Commander now. I'm going to say his name wrong. Francois Darlin. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's wrong. But he was commander of the Vichy French forces, and he actually cooperated with the Allies. He said, after a while, we'll just work with the Allies. And in return for being installed as High Commissioner, with many other Vichy French officials keeping their jobs, he was assassinated, and after Free French gradually came to be the dominant of the government. Free France became to dominate the government there. I don't know what I was trying to say earlier. But he ended up being assassinated. He cooperated with the Allies, and some people didn't like that. Like I said, they were still allies with Nazis, and Adolf still had power, with these people, and he set up this puppet government in France. But it was in Northern Africa, so it wasn't like, probably weren't going to send, the top guys down here to fight the American and British, because that's just a waste of resources right now. The Nazis were fighting the Soviets. Yeah, they got to kind of worry about this, but it wasn't a huge problem in their idea, so they didn't really send that many troops down to Northern Africa. Alphonse Juin? That's definitely wrong. He was a French general during World War One and during the Battle of France. He was captured after the Battle of France, and then he was a prisoner of war until he was released at the Vichy government, and then he was assigned to North Africa to command French forces. Even though a general for Vichy France, he still didn't support the government. So after Operation Torch, the invasion of the Algeria and Morocco, that the Americans and the British did, forces that happened in November, Wien ordered French troops in Tunisia to resist the Italians and German troops that were there. And he actually was praised very highly for that, and he was, he helped the Allies out with that. Because he wasn't a fan of the puppet government of Vichy France, of the Nazis. He wanted to go back to old France. And, yeah. So, the accomplishments. What did this get? The Allies. Why was this important? Why did we just go invade Northern Africa? Well, like we talked about at the beginning, the Allies had been on defense the whole time of this war, basically, before. They had been, as you would say, on their heels. They haven't been making any moves. They've been being followers. They needed something to change, or else, probably not going to win the war, and, it's just going to be over. So, this win in Northern Africa gave them the offensive. Now they can make the moves, right? Now they can kind of, do we want to invade Italy? Do we want to come down still from Britain and go into France? Do we want to do two-way? Do we want, it gives them a lot of ideas and a lot of things that they can go on the offensive with. This was actually pretty cool. It was first time, collabing with British and American troops, working well together to take down the enemy with two powerhouses. Sometimes there's problems. Like I said, like, it's hard to be who wants to be the alpha and who's going to step down for just this battle, this war, whatever. And they worked really well. And honestly, it's not practice, but the Vichy France, or this battle in Northern Africa, was almost, you could say, it's like a practice before the major war. How are these guys going to do before the game? Obviously, the game is taking out the Nazis. They were still in a game against the Vichy France, or French, don't get me wrong. But, their main enemy, or the main boss, the big guy, is the Nazis, or are the Nazis. So, when they worked well together, that was huge. They did a good job in this Northern African campaign and Operation Torch. This allowed them to have bases along the Mediterranean, So meanwhile, they could contribute to prosecuting the anti-submarines and getting submarines out of that Mediterranean, like Nazi U-boats and all the things, allowed them to move through the Mediterranean and kind of control what comes in, what goes out, and all those things. They had a lot of power now. Now you get the sea, that's big. Having land is big. Having water is bigger sometimes. So, it also was the largest American campaign, the Atlantic Theater. First major carried out jointly. So I guess what I mean that one was, like I said, it was the first ever time that these two big, I guess you could say, two big countries jointly combined together and fight it well. and ended up taking over a key part of the war and turning the tide. This was a true tide turner in the war. This was when they won this and they took over this North African land. Now it was all right. It's our time. Enough. Germany, you had your fun being on offense, but guess what? Now you're going to get punched in the mouth. Now we're coming for you. We're going down the field. Like I said, it's time to go to Europe. It's time to take out the boss. North Africa gave them that opportunity. It allowed them to say, okay, where are we going? What part are we taking out first? Who's getting hit in the face with the 1-2 combo of America and Britain? Let's go help the Soviets out now. Let's get them some help and let's take down the bad guy. The importance of this whole battle was huge because it allowed, with the Mediterranean especially, allowed what is coming into the Mediterranean. Let's block this shipping lane. You can't get that. Yeah, sorry, Italy. No more of that for you through here. Sorry, can't get that. Can't get this. Can't go through there. You can't help your troops. You start cutting countries off. You start cutting things off. All right. And especially now, so they got to go to Europe. And usually where they're going to start, they go straight into Italy. Or they go anywhere. But they go into Italy with some troops. And they got a pretty good way. I mean, you cross the Mediterranean, it's not that far away. And when you win this big war, this big battle, or this key battle, I should say, more than a big battle. Some of the guys that were under Vichy French rule, or this were Franco-Germans, kind of like, maybe I'm fighting for the wrong guy. I don't want to be on the losing side of this, So you kind of gain more people. You gain more soldiers, and you start taking away from the enemy, and it's the turning tide in the war. It was important because, like I've been saying, it just set up a lot of things. It was going from being on your heels to being 10 feet in front of the dude in front of you, Someone else has been controlling the whole game. You don't know if you're going left or you're going right, and now you are controlling the game. He kind of has to look at you now. Yes, it wasn't like, they just won the war from this. They still had to go into Europe and win key battles there. But now it was kind of like the flame to the fire. Things were going, and things were going to go hopefully the right way for them. They wanted to. The failures of this operation. Now, this, like I said, technically General Marshall was correct. It didn't really take away from the Nazis. They kept pounding the Soviets. They didn't care that much about what's going on in Northern Africa. Oh, you guys are taking over Algeria, Morocco? Huh? It's whatever. Not that big of a deal. But, because they're thinking, we take out the Soviets, oh man, we're winning this. No one's stopping us. Get all that stuff. So, Marshall was right. Luckily, though, there was enough time for the Americans and British to take this land. The Soviets were holding out for long enough, and the Soviets ended up pushing the Nazis out. But if it wasn't, who knows? If it didn't work out that way, maybe they should have invaded Europe to actually turn the Nazis away from the Soviets. But it ended up not really mattering, and but that was one of the failures. It didn't do what they wanted it to do. And then Vichy France builds up troops in Tunisia. Axis forces in Tunisia would go there because obviously Hitler realizes these people are just destroying it, and that just made some more casualties, made the British lose more troops and resources, and the Americans lose the same thing. They ended up beating them, obviously, but it didn't fall as quickly as they wanted to, and it just kind of made this North African campaign prolonged. So it is what it is, I guess. The aftermath. So what is kind of like not the aftermath of the war, but the aftermath of this operation. So Operation Anton. That was an operation by Adolf Hitler which he ordered. So he saw and he sent German troops to occupy the Vichy France, and Additionally, French sailors in Toulon scuttled many of the French Navy ships to prevent their capture by the Germans. So the French are already saying, get out of here. They've been saying, get out of here, the Nazis, but the Nazis are still trying to take them over. And yeah, it just kind of was. The French started siding with the Allies and building up their strength, and the Allies' troops advanced into Tunisia with their goal to trapping all the Axis forces there. After this operation of Torch, they wanted to capture all the Axis forces and get them all out of Africa and take them out, and they ended up doing that. And now it was time to advance, time to go on to their next port, next mission, and which was and it will end up being taking Italy. At least some of the people that were involved here will go to Italy and start attacking through there and start their European campaign. But the aftermath was literally just, all right, it's time to set up and time to get going on the main focus of this war and our main enemy. And so the casualties, like I said, wasn't a major war or loss. The Allies lost 480 people that were killed during this, which isn't anything crazy. I mean, it was only 3 days from the 8th to the 10th, like 2 days, but I think 3 days of fighting because 8, 9, 10. 720 were wounded. The French lost more, obviously, because they were trying to defend, but they realized it was kind of not important to defend, and, it's hard to fight for a country you don't care about. That's what I think the Vichy French soldiers fell into, especially the ones down there, you know, especially fight for a country that kind of destroyed and made a mockery of your old country. And you live in Africa and you're not even French or you're not from France. So you don't have that kind of blood, that connection of, oh, this is my homeland. So, I mean, they lost some, but then they were just like, why are we even fighting these guys? Like, is it worth it? No. So they kind of just gave up, and that's why it wasn't a huge battle, huge numbers battle, I should say. It still was a huge success for the Allies, but it was more of a sneaky success, I would say. It's not everything you hear about or something you always hear about in the war, but I think without this, the war could have gone on longer. The Allies would have been, in a lot of struggles and a much deeper hole without coming to Northern Africa and especially winning these key areas and then honestly winning all of Northern Africa and taking over the Mediterranean. Because without it, they would be kind of, I think, behind the 8 ball going into Europe. And then if the Soviets fell, that's a whole different story, I should say. But I think it's a key and a sneaky battle and a sneaky operation, and which allowed the Allies to truly help secure a path into Europe and start their European campaign. Here is my works cited. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something new. Have a great day.